So as has become a Zoom standard, we've been lamenting the poor weather here in the Northeast for the last couple of minutes. And I hope somebody is someplace in the country that's actually seeing some sunshine today.
Not in Chicago.
Not in Maryland.
Anybody West Coasters yet? I don't know if I see any.
No, but we have Delft.
Well, that's right.
Hi, Evo.
Hi, it's gray, cold and gray, but no snow.
Well, by now it must be almost dark, I would guess.
It's very dark.
Yeah.
It's 7 p.m., but it's pitch black.
Yeah. You're getting sunset around 4 p.m. now or so?
Yes, not quite as bad, more like 5.
No, that's pretty much what it is in New York.
Yeah.
Oh, it's in already.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, and
Unless.
yeah, so apologies again to everyone. We know there was a mistake in terms of a typo on the meeting time, and that's why we're doing a little bit of a song and dance here until we have more folks filter in.
There's been no additional requests or questions on the president's listserv about timing.
Okay, so Maurice, what's the current count? We have my screen shows 19 participants, and you had RSVPs of registrations of well in excess of 40. Is that right?
Yeah, actually 56.
Yeah.
But the RSVP to was 1:30 Eastern.
Yes, I am truly sorry about that confusion, and I'm sort of multitasking and furiously emailing lots of different people, and luckily it does seem like more folks are starting to trickle in.
Maureen, is there anything I can do to help?
Not that I can think of, but thank you for asking. We could offer our bracha and kind of spiritually extend credit to those not present for it through our own intention.
And what we actually can do is slow walk the bracha and some greetings, and then with apologies to our preliminary speakers on the agenda, they are not, pardon the expression, critical voting items. So we may start on those items and then leave the one small voting matter and then the substance of the meeting for after 1:30 when everybody should join.
And Seth, I'm freelancing ahead of you, but I would say to go with our report before even the people who are introducing each other, so that yes. They maximize who they see.
Right, exactly. So, Maurice, if you don't mind, lead us in the bracha, and then we'll move along.
Happy to. I'm actually screen sharing from Ritual Well, where this blessing also exists. And I invite you to join me in the Hebrew or the transliteration. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'tzorchei tzibur. Full of blessing, you are, eternal one, our God, majesty of the universe, who's consecrated us with your commands and commanded us to occupy ourselves with the needs of the community.
Well, thank you, Maurice, and welcome everybody who's joined us thus far. Maybe it's befitting of the times that we're even a little bit confused as to the time, because these are indeed challenging days. It would be an understatement, I think, to say that the world has changed since we last met as a plenum. That was back in April. And everything about our world has changed. The secular world, our Jewish world, our larger Reconstructionist community, our individual synagogues and Havurah, and each of us. And this plenum meeting, we think, is the first gathering since October 7th for representatives of all of our communities. So I think it's a particularly important time for us to get together and be with each other and talk about some of the things that are foremost on our minds. So we have adopted what was our initial plan for this meeting, our pre-October 7th plan, And instead are going to focus most of today's meeting on presentations and discussions about how we collectively and individually have been affected by, and most importantly, are responding to the events on and since October 7th. As always, it's our hope and expectation that each of the plenum representatives who are on this call, in this meeting, will bring the information from today back to your respective communities to talk with your individual synagogue or Havaraz leadership and your fellow members. And so we can, in effect, broaden the message or the learning that we hopefully will gain in this afternoon's meeting. But as we're waiting for others to join us, and because we do have some very positive regular business to attend to, we're going to reshuffle the agenda slightly and start first deal with some of the more regular business, and then turn to the special programming, so to speak, for today. So as Deborah, I think what Deborah always wisely suggests, but as Deborah wisely suggested in this instance, I'm going to turn first to her report and to Seth's report as president and chair, and then we'll move on to some of the more plenum member focused items before we go on to the meat of the meeting. Deborah, do you want to start? No?
No, I think I'll start.
Oh,
I'll start.
okay.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. This is Seth Rosen. I want to thank everybody who's here and everybody who is with intention on their way here. I'm always really delighted to have a chance to be with so many of the leaders of our affiliated congregations. As Ed said, Deborah and I have been asked to share a few words about what is happening at Reconstructing Judaism in our movement, but not to focus at this moment on the impact of the war in Israel and Gaza, because we've set aside a large block of time for later in the agenda for that conversation. It is, though, I think, impossible to talk about the work of the movement at this moment without referencing the war, the apparently rising tide of anti-Semitism in America and beyond, and the increasing challenge of building and sustaining community based on our shared values across generations, across ideological differences at a time in crisis. Those challenges affect everything we do these days, every gathering, every interaction, and sometimes every conversation. Without losing sight of the context, the most significant work we've been doing at Reconstructing Judaism has been working to fulfill the key goals of our 5-year strategic plan. As many of you may remember, these goals are supporting communities, most significantly our affiliated congregations and Havarot, building and expanding platforms for connection online and on land like Ritual Well and Evolve, investing in rabbinic education, working for racial justice and equity within our movement and beyond, and building a sustainable organization. Our first goal, supporting congregations. In the last 6 months, we've launched and expanded 2 new initiatives, and Deborah will talk about those in a minute. These are the Weninger-Markowitz Family Education Project, the goal of which is to expand and vitalize our support for K-12 and family education in our affiliated communities, and an expansion of our support for the equity, diversity, and inclusion work of our affiliated communities. As I said, Deborah will give you more details on those. We're also devoting really substantial efforts to becoming a more sustainable organization. And what do we mean by sustainability? We think of that as a combination of financial stability and sustainability, the ability to generate resources to meet the needs of the present without putting our future at risk, and programmatic stability, the ability to develop, mature, and complete programs that are responsive to our communities and the other constituencies we serve over time. There are 2 prongs of that work. One is making sure that we're being as efficient, as effective, and as impactful as we can in doing the work of the movement. Judging by impact, are we making the best possible use of the Jewish communal funds, like congregational dues and donations, that we receive? These efforts, led by Deborah and the senior management team, with the support of our board, are resulting in a hard look at everything that we do, from supporting our congregations to training new rabbis to managing our organization against the goal of maximizing impact. This will lead to changes in how we operate, many of which will be internal, kind of below the waterline, but some of which may be visible to you as we strive to become better, making the most effective use of each dollar in serving your communities and the Reconstructionist movement writ large. The other prong is growing our financial resources. As we talked about before, each year congregational dues pay for less than half of the direct cost of operating our Thriving Communities Department, the professionals who directly support our affiliated communities. Just the tuition dollars provide less than half of the amount we need to run the rabbinical college. Like all Jewish communal organizations, we will always be heavily dependent on donations and other philanthropic support. To be sustainable, we need to broaden and deepen our sources of philanthropic support, not to be reliant on a few super donors or on PPP loans or on tax credit rebates, but to have a broad-based, repeating, and sustainable community of committed Reconstructionists who see the value in our work and will support us. The primary focus of that second prong of building sustainability has been the Momentum campaign, which has had the twin goals of raising $10 million to implement our strategic plan and broadening and deepening our donor base. I'm happy to tell you that the Momentum campaign has raised a little over $9 million in cash and pledges towards its $10 million goal, and an additional $2 million plus in new planned gifts. Among other things, the campaign has brought the major funding for the Family Education Initiative, for the expansion of our racial justice work, as well as new support for the rabbinical program and Camp Havaya. As many of you who have run capital campaigns in your own communities know, the last million is always the hardest. To meet that target, we are working hard to engage Reconstructionists from across our movement toward the goal of broadening and deepening our sources of support. Led by Deborah, by Rachel Robinson, our Vice President for Development, and by our small development team, we have been holding parlor meetings and other gatherings across the movement to have conversations with committed Reconstructionists about our work. In the last 4 months, we, and that's a lot of Deborah, have been to the Berkshires, Westchester County, Boston, New York City, and Evanston, and talked with nearly 150 supporters and potential supporters. We hope to do 10 to 12 more of these gatherings in 2024. We would be delighted, thrilled, if you would help us organize sessions in your communities. We are completely dedicated to building our support in a way that does not compete with congregational fundraising. We do need to reach the people across our movement who already support a number of charitable causes and make sure they understand the value of the work being done by the Reconstructionist movement to advance our shared values, build our communities, and train the next generation of leaders, especially at this moment and in the years and months to come. Speaking of Deborah, in a few weeks, we will mark 10 years of Deborah's leadership of the Reconstructionist movement, the 10th anniversary of Deborah's becoming president and CEO of Reconstructing Judaism. In celebration of Deborah's leadership and that milestone, on Wednesday, April 3rd, we will hold an online event bringing together a panel of women who are leaders of national Jewish organizations for an engaging and important conversation. We will publicize this event broadly across the movement, and we hope that when the information is available, you will publicize it in your communities. This year also marks the 25th anniversary of Deborah's graduation from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. At the RRC graduation this coming May, we will honor Deborah, together with other members of her rabbinical school class, by awarding her an honorary Doctor of Divinity degree. Also this summer, starting at the end of May and lasting for 3 months, or around 3 months, Deborah will be taking her sabbatical to renew and recharge for her leadership in the years to come. Deborah has been entitled to a sabbatical, actually longer than 3 months, for a while, and it has been deferred more than once in this era of crisis after crisis. During Deborah's sabbatical, Rabbi Amber Powers, who is the Executive Vice President of Reconstructing Judaism, effectively our Chief Operating Officer, will serve as acting president. Now I'll turn over to Deborah.
Thank you, Seth. You see, I think from his report how closely Seth and I work, and that's one of the reasons why we kind of conflate our reports, because it's just much easier to bring them together. I don't see myself. I see Seth spotlighted. Oh, okay, there I am. Thank you so much, Maurice. I want to build on Seth's remarks about milestones and transitions. It is very odd to hear oneself talked about that way. What I want, where my upcoming sabbatical, it's 176 days, I think, away, is a very short term. In the spring, we're going to mark a major one, a permanent one, and we, Reconstructing Judaism, and all of you in this convening, will invite you to say goodbye to Dr. Tressa Grauer, our Vice President for Thriving Communities. This is not the moment that we're going to take to say all kinds of amazing and appreciative and praising things to say about Tressa and her leadership. She has been in this role for, I believe, 12 years and has seen the organization from immediately after the merger, and has led and partnered and staffed and helped to vision a really powerful and impactful place in the world. And so we'll create opportunities to celebrate her. But it felt really important to share this information with all of you as we convene. Tressa came to her decision independently of the change management process that Seth just spoke about. And I and Amber, and in consultation with Seth and other board members, are processing her decision in the context of that change management process, with the goals that Seth outlined, and with the real effort to make certain that we have maximum impact. So we're still in the midst of process. Tressa's been incredibly gracious about giving us a very long time frame, and it allows us the time to be as thoughtful and as deliberate as we need to be. So we will share those changes with you and thoughts about what comes next as soon as we're ready to, as soon as they're clearer in our shared minds, and we're ready to talk about them in an articulate way. So I want to expand briefly on the two programmatic initiatives that live. We aim to make things across the organization as much as possible. So these are initiatives that sit in the Thriving Communities Department and are drawing on resources across the organization and are having an impact across the organization. One is the Wenger-Markowitz Family Education Initiative, and I'm dropping into the link to dropping into the chat, excuse me, two links that talk about that initiative from Reconstructing Judaism's website. This is essentially a broad-scale educational initiative designed to create curricular materials, modular curricular materials for Reconstructionist communities. The Jonathan Markowitz is a longtime board member. He came over from the Jewish Reconstructionist Federation Board. He knows about congregational needs and congregational aspirations, and he and his wife Ruth Wenger care deeply about the next generation. They care deeply about the educational programs within Reconstructionist congregations. Their gift has allowed us to hire a 2020 graduate of RRC, Rabbi Lily Solachek. There's a wonderful profile of them. They use they, them pronouns to work to first and foremost curate existing resources, to hear from education directors, and to gather together and to create, where necessary, educational resources in support of Reconstructionist schools and Reconstructionist communities. The most recent parlor meeting that Seth and I did was just last Monday night, and Lily joined us and was just substantive and visionary and really, really exciting. The second initiative that I want to talk to you about is in advance of, we did a reorganization this last, gotta find my notes, December 3rd plenum. We did a reorganization of our justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. And we reorganized internal staff, and we also with a campaign gift, a momentum campaign gift, have been able to hire for at least a couple of years, and we hope to be able to raise sufficient funding to institutionalize this position, a program coordinator. So Rabbi Sandra Lawson will continue her work on racial diversity, equity, and inclusion, including significantly working with Jews of color within the Reconstructionist movement beyond, and the very extensive public representation that she does. Rabbi Micah Weiss has been elevated, and his title is Associate Director of, nope, that's Seth's remarks, Associate Director of, I didn't write the right thing down, Associate Director for Thriving Communities and I think it's justice, equity, diversity, and initiative and inclusion. And Micah will be taking the lead to in work with congregations to on a wide range of initiatives, racial justice and other expressions of equity, other expressions of other justice expressions that we really care about, disability inclusion, rising needs around LGBT rights, and so on and so on. And with this grant funding, we starting last Wednesday was Rabbi Ash Softman, a 2023 graduate of RC who is coming in to be the program coordinator. This is one of the things that we are often, it's hard for us to come through and to all the extraordinary. This is when we talk about impact, we're really aware that you do amazing programming and we do amazing programming. And the part of the way of making certain that all of that amazing stuff is really out there in the world, part of the impact is making certain that we can network you with each other. We can get our resources out to the broadest range of you. And so Ash will be able to do that in this area. And the last two things I just want to say is that one of the things that Micah is leading and Ash will help to support is building on an extraordinary curriculum created by Rabbi Dr. Mira Wasserman, who is both a professor of Talmud at RRC and the director of the Center for Jewish Ethics on Jews and race. And it's an amazing, accessible curriculum. And what started last week was, there are the links. What started last week was a train the trainer cohort of how to take this amazing curriculum. That's the first link, and how to bring it home to your congregations. And we have a report. The first session was last Thursday. There were 32 people registered, 27 folks came from 12 different Reconstructionist congregations. The participants love the material and are excited and eager to offer the course to their congregations in the spring. The very last thing I want to say in my report, and I rarely do this, but I do want to invite you to a keynote lecture that I am delivering next Sunday. One of the ways that I'll talk more about Israel in the second part of the meeting. And it has been a bit of a blessing to be able to kind of retreat into my PhD doctoral rabbit hole to prepare a keynote on the significance of Judaism as a civilization as we approach the 90th anniversary of the publication of Mordecai Kaplan's magnum opus. And if you are interested in hearing more about it, here's a link to register for that event.
Well, thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Seth. And predictably, now that it is 1:27 p.m., we have a flood of newcomers joining the meeting. So what I think we'll do for the moment is to give them a chance to settle into the meeting. I know that Craig Levine is already online, and I'll ask, moving on to one of our following topics, Craig to speak first to give us a little introduction and special greetings from his congregation, B'nai Keshet in Montclair, New Jersey. Then I'll say a few more words to the newest newcomers who should be online by then, and we'll move on to the rest of the program. So if we can, Craig, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you, Seth, Deborah, Ed, particularly in light of news just received, Tressa, for all you do always, and particularly at this moment. So I'm a member of B'nai Keshet. I've been attending since 2002. We are in Montclair, New Jersey, and we have what I think is a thriving and fabulous community. But I'll add, after having bragged, that in truth, Montclair, New Jersey is, I think, a somewhat easier place than many others, including many of yours, in which to build a thriving Reconstructionist community. As just two exemplary electoral data points, Montclair voted 86% for Hillary in 2016 and 89% for Biden in 2020. And we live up or down, depending on one's politics, to the stereotype those numbers would imply. But many of the surrounding towns are decidedly purple. And we actually have quite a diverse congregation across every conceivable axis. I think we're at about, last I checked, just under 300 member units, families or individuals. We have two fantastic rabbis, Elliot Tepperman and Ariane Weitzman. We have a very thoughtful, engaged congregational core. We are, and it's a point of great personal interest to me, so no surprise that I choose to mention it, quite an increasingly musical congregation with more and more instrumental music contributing to the ruach of our prayer life over the years. Many of you know Nefesh Mountain, Eric and Donnie. We are proud to claim them, and they have been known to show up to play and sing with us now and again. I've not yet been permitted to have my jazz quartet perform the final movement psalm from Coltrane's Love Supreme Suite during the alternative Avodah Yom Kippur service. But Elliot knows I'm going to keep asking. Two recent vignettes I think will provide a flavor of our community. First, on October 14th, the first Shabbat after October 7th, 8 or 10 multi-faith clergy, with apology, I feel myself choking up telling this story. 8 or 10 multi-faith clergy showed up on the doorstep of our shul, as they'd done on the Shabbat following the Tree of Life massacre, to greet us with great warmth and great love. And they did this because they're good people, and they did this because we've shown up with and for them for decades. Second, as you all know, even in 89% for Biden communities, Israel is the issue on which Jews divide. Last Monday evening, 6 days ago, we held a listening session in our sanctuary for people to share without crosstalk or debate how they're feeling at this moment. In the room were an anti-Zionist, a few people who I'm pretty sure, though they didn't say it, would pummel Hamas to the last man without limitation as to collateral damage, and of course everywhere in between. Everyone said afterwards, both publicly and privately, that it was a cathartic community and connection building exercise in which they felt heard and affirmed. We are 12 miles due west of Midtown Manhattan, and we'd love to have you visit us anytime. You and yours may stay with my wife Phoebe and me. We're empty nesters. We have space anytime. And yes, I mean it. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. And I can't let comments go without at least a little bit of rebuttal and response. On the rebuttal side, reflecting the rivalry across the river, I'll remind you all that in New York County, also known as Manhattan, in both elections, Trump received less than 10% of the vote. So we're still ahead of you guys in New Jersey. And as to Nefesh Mountain, my sister is a member of a reform community up in Rhode Island, and she called me bragging a few months ago about this amazing Jewish bluegrass group who played for them. Have you ever heard of them, Nefesh Mountain? But of course we've heard of Nefesh Mountain, and we're grateful to have them. For those who are joining, just one last reminder, our apologies that there was some confusion on the meeting time listed in the agenda. There was a typo. What we have done is we reshuffled the agenda so we could take care of some of the non-interactive parts of this meeting before everybody joined at the 1:30 mark. The whole meeting is being recorded, so you can view the portions you missed after the meeting is done. And we've saved the more interactive parts of the meeting to come yet after 1:30, when everybody hopefully will be on board. So with that, let's turn to the next item on our reshuffled agenda. And I'd like to invite Wendy Jordan, who I think is online now, from Lev Ha'ir in Philadelphia, to tell us a little bit about her community and herself. Wendy?
Hi, everybody. This is my first meeting, and thank you for welcoming me. I wanted to talk about Lev Ha'ir, heart of the city. We're located in Center City, Philly. It's a small synagogue with 65 members. Havarodas, 20 to 30 people. Our beloved Rabbi Julie Greenberg has been with the synagogue for more than 20 years and is open to new ways to engage congregates. So what's special about our shul? Two things I want to talk about. One is our community is very caring. It's really what makes us different. We support each other in numerous ways. An example being Shamanu, which means to hear. It's a meeting held on Zoom once a week for an hour. It's confidential and only Lev Ha'ir members may participate. We see 15 to 20 people joining each week. It's a chance for people to talk to one another. There's a person who starts the meeting by introducing a topic. She also provides a brief context. Then the floor is opened. People may address the topic or simply check in. Some speak briefly and others speak at length, depending on how they feel that day. Some people really need to talk, and Shimano gives them the chance to connect with others. Shimano was instituted during COVID to relieve the isolation people were feeling and has continued because people benefit from it. Other ways that we show care and concern is by sending birthday cards to everyone. Also, we express loving kindness or hesed through cards and phone calls when congregants are suffering bad times. The second thing I want to talk about is the wide use of Zoom. Shimano was an example of the second feature of Lev Ha'ir. Zoom allows us to adapt to our mostly older members. They may participate in services and other activities without having to leave home, drive, park, or venture into high crime areas. We worship through Zoom. We keep Shabbat and participate in other services for holidays. For Hanukkah, the Shabbat service will include lighting of the candles, which congregants at home will do themselves alongside. Also, we have council meetings, a book club, and various educational series on Zoom that are well attended. In fact, most synagogue activities are on Zoom or in combination with in-person services. High holiday services, the Yom Kippur break fast, and Pesach Seder are all on Zoom and in person. Through the use of Zoom, every single person who wants to participate is able to do so. Participation is higher than it was prior to COVID. I should mention that Zoom also allows us to include members from outside of the Philly area. For example, we have members in Hawaii, some abroad, and I myself am in California. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Wendy. And that's a wonderful punchline on your presentation that you're in California and a member of this wonderful community in Philadelphia. Okay, on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Plenum Steering Committee. First, as a reminder to those of you who've been on the plenum for a while as representatives, and
it's recorded. It's recorded. It's recording.
And to allow
It's recording. Yeah, I'm on it.
If I may ask anybody who is not speaking, please hit mute. Great, thank you. And for those who are new to the plenum, I'll explain what the steering committee is. The steering committee. Maurice, can you mute everybody who's not speaking?
Right there on the counter is fine. Yeah.
Okay, we should have quiet now. Thank you. The steering committee consists of people who are currently sitting as plenum members or plenum members within the past 2 years prior to joining the steering committee, who are committed to providing some additional service to our plenum to assist in organizing our meetings and moving the plenum's business forward. The primary role of the steering committee is to assist in developing the agenda for these plenum meetings and to develop them carefully. The steering committee also reviews, evaluates, and provides comments between meetings and in advance of plenum meetings on proposed resolutions or statements that are going to be brought to the plenum for its consideration. And a great example of that is the resolution on reparations that we, as a plenum, adopted as a body a year ago. And the steering committee had done a great deal of work in advance of presenting that resolution to this body to vet the resolution and facilitate the meeting in which we discussed it. And the Plenum Steering Committee is also the group from which the two Plenum-appointed members of the Board of Governors are selected. The steering committee was formed a little over 3 years ago. It can have up to 9 members, plus the chair. And we, at the present time, some of our charter members are rotating off the committee, and we're thrilled to be welcoming some new members to the steering committee. So I am very pleased at this meeting today to present to you 2 new members of the Plenum Steering Committee. And although our charter that created this body does not require us to vote on the new nominees for the Plenum Steering Committee, we thought it was nice to present them all to you and to have you all welcome them with a resounding, hopefully, yay after we present them. So first, in alphabetical order, is Judy Ackerman from Adat Shalom in Bethesda, Maryland. Judy's been a member of Adat Shalom for about 25 years. She was first exposed to Reconstructionism in the Reconstructionist world while a grad student in North Carolina. And like many of us, Judy was a migrant from the Jewish conservative movement who found a better fit within the Reconstructionist approach, first through a Reconstructionist Havarah and then through Adat Shalom. Now, Judy and I also have something else in common. When I was shul shopping as a youngish adult, my first and only stop was West End Synagogue. I walked in the door thinking I'd shul shop, and I never left. So too with Judy and Adat Shalom. She walked in the door, she joined, and she's never left. And again, my twin sister, as it seems, from different parents and a different state, and I followed essentially the same path later. Judy first went on to her synagogue's board, as I did, and then made the big step as president of Adat Shalom, president or co-president, assuming that role, as it seems like for most of us, we all wind up doing during a period of crisis, which of course was the COVID pandemic, which some of you may remember. So Judy has now finished her term as co-president, and we are thrilled that she's offered to and agreed to serve on the steering committee and to welcome her here today. Now to our next new nominee, who should need no introduction, at least in my world, Len Goldner. And I can say Len Goldner of Hebrew Congregation of Somers, New York, but I will not give up claim to Len, because Len is also a member of West End Synagogue, and he may be another one of my twin siblings by different parents. Len and I are both lawyers, don't hold it against us, and we both are past presidents of West End Synagogue, and we both have served together on West End Synagogue's board for many years, many years, Len more than me even. But beyond those points of commonality, my good friend Len greatly outranks me with his Reconstructionist credentials. Len now holds the rare position of honorary trustee of West End Synagogue. He was a founding member of West End Synagogue and served as West End's first president, which was then called chair, immediately after its founding. Over more than 50 years, Len and his wife Jackie have been members of 5 Reconstructionist synagogues, including 3 on which he served as an officer or board member. He served on the RRC board from 1987 to 2000, and he currently serves as a member, as I mentioned, he's currently a member of 2 Reconstructionist congregations, and he has served as the plenum representative of both congregations. He's the plenum representative here today on behalf of the Hebrew Congregation of Somers, but as I say, we never let go of him in the West End. So I'm thrilled to invite both Judy and Len to join the Plenum Steering Committee and have them bring their wisdom and their experience and their great judgment to our efforts to ensure that the plenum continues to be a vital and thriving institution, and that we can continue to present, I hope, useful and informative meetings for all of you. So although it's not required, I would love to ask for an advisory motion to elect Len and Judy officially, or to ratify their appointment to the steering committee. Do I have somebody making a motion? Raise a hand, somebody. I see Craig. Do we have a second? I can't see everybody's face. Oh, we got a second. I think Rick. Okay. And the polling is up.
And I'll just mention, we did achieve a quorum quite a while ago.
Oh, thank you, Maurice. I should have mentioned that. Actually a great test vote, so to remind everybody what the mechanics of voting are, even though we don't have any formal voting items for today's meeting. And how wonderful is that? We have unanimity of all those who participated. Congratulations. Welcome, Len and Judy. And then nothing comes without a sales pitch. We still have room for 1 or 2 additional members on the steering committee. And I would be thrilled if any member of this body listening here today, or anyone you know who is qualified, would be interested in joining the steering committee. Everybody who's on this call today should, by definition, be qualified or almost qualified to join the steering committee, since the only qualifications are to be currently a member of the plenum as a representative, or to have served as a representative in the past 2 years, and to have attended at least 2 meetings in the past 2 years. So everybody here today has at least met 2/3 of that qualification. It's not a heavy lift. We tend to meet generally between 1 and 3 times per meeting cycle, meaning per 6 months between plenum meetings. The number of meetings we have as a steering committee varies with the level of business. The meetings tend to be 1.5, 2-hour meetings, very useful, very interesting, and we have a fantastic bunch of members of the steering committee. And we look always for diversity in terms of all the potential metrics within our movement for membership on the committee: geographic, congregational size, and all of the measures of diversity. So I encourage anyone who might be interested, please contact either Maurice or me, and we'd be thrilled to work with you in terms of candidacy for the steering committee. And if you know of anybody else who would make a great steering committee member who would qualify, basically, if they've been on the plenum representative in the past 2 years, please chat with them and let us know. We'd love to have them on board. Okay, with that, we now can pivot to the main topic of today. And I think we now have everybody on board who's going to be joining us. So this is going to be our report and discussion on our movement during the time of war in Israel and all that has followed here in our own communities and overseas in Israel. The report is going to focus on ways that the staff at Reconstructing Judaism have worked to support our congregations during this challenging time, as well as discussions and statements about what we as a movement are taking part in. We're going to start with a presentation first from Rabbi Maurice. Maurice is going to talk about consultations with and programming offered by Reconstructing Judaism to our congregations as we all grapple with the war and its effects, as well as pointing out public statements and resources that are being made available to our congregations. And then we'll hear from Tressa Grauer, who's our Vice President of Thriving Communities. And Tressa will talk about the human aspects of the consultations with congregations that have been ongoing. What kinds of help was sought, patterns or recurring themes that she and her staff are encountering in the challenges faced by our congregations, and the impacts that it's had on our Thriving Community staff and our work. And then we're going to pivot to Rabbi Deborah Waxman, and with support from the board chair, Seth Rosen, we'll discuss how these issues are being addressed at the Reconstructing Judaism movement-wide level, including relationships with other organizations and the wider Reconstructionist and Jewish world, and observations from recent visits to other congregations. And Seth can offer some further perspectives from his role with our Board of Governors. And then we'll follow all these presentations with a Q&A period when each of you will be welcome to ask questions you may have of any of our speakers here today. Now, this meeting is focusing on our congregations. That's why we're here. We're the plenum. But let's also remember our rabbis, who are our partners in everything we do and who are struggling through all the same discord and challenges that we are all facing. Just as we need our rabbis more than ever, they need our support as congregational leaders more than ever. That can be a subject of a whole nother meeting unto itself. But as we walk away from today's meeting thinking about what more we can do for our congregations, let's also think about what more we can do for our rabbis. With that, let me turn it over to one of certainly my favorite rabbis, and I have a lot of them, Rabbi Maurice Harris.
Hi, and I want to just mention, actually, we also have some remarks coming from Marla Baker from Jewish Reconstructionist Congregation as part of this mix. So I'm going to look for, or maybe Tressa, could you look for Rick's, because I think Rick and Marla are on together. Thank you. Greetings. So I want to just share, a few pieces of data that I think are useful in understanding some of the work that we've been doing on staff in response to the aftermath of October 7th and the ongoing war. And the first is that by count that I put together after asking others on staff, I know of at least 23 different congregations that we have either offered consultation for, or where we have done some kind of online programming, helping their community to discuss and address the current situation. And that's 23 that I know of. I suspect the actual number is somewhat higher than that, and that's out of a total of 96. That's a really, really high rate of direct interaction. Tressa will speak a little bit more about sort of the character and content of a lot of those consultations. In terms of just other important data points, the movement, the two central organizations of the movement issued a statement on October 7th, and then signed on to a joint statement a few days later from the Progressive Israel Network, or PIN. I will post in the chat the link to access PIN. That's helpful because you can, for people who are wondering what kinds of statements have the movement organizations formally made, those are the two direct statements that have been made. But in addition to that, there was a letter from Rabbi Deborah Waxman that went out to the big mailing list, the big email list that includes members all across all across the world. There was also an important letter that came from Rabbi Isaac Sapoznik to Camp Havaya families and alum. There have been just around 10 different essays that have been published on Evolve. Those are essays giving voice to different individual viewpoints about different aspects of the war. There have been something like 65 dozen new pieces that have been published on Ritual Well, which is the Reconstructionist Movement's platform for new ritual, poetry, and prayer. There was a presentation that I made jointly with another Reconstructionist rabbi, Rabbi Lori Zimmerman, at the Reconstructionist Educators of North America conference that took place during this time. And there have also been presentations that have happened in person at a few of our congregations where different movement leaders have had visits. So I did one of those at our affiliate in Toronto the weekend after the first Shabbat after October 7th. So that's a little bit of a sense of the kinds of sort of the numbers and stats. There have also been two webinars that I've led in my Israel Affairs specialist role, one for our San Francisco Bay Area congregations that was organized primarily by Ner Shalom and Katati, one for String of Pearls, which is a small congregation in Princeton. And there are plans for a possible event that will be open to members across our movement, I believe on December 17th. There'll be more info about that. So I'll stop there and hand off to Tressa.
Trying to multitask here. What I was just about to do is post a link into the chat for the webinar that Maurice just referred to. We've been busily trying to put that on the calendar, and I am sharing a link to the webinar that we're opening up publicly. That is a version of one of the talks that Maurice just gave, and you have an opportunity to hear that yourselves on December 17th. So thanks to everybody. I wanted to share a little bit, as Ed suggested, that just what are we hearing? What kinds of requests are we getting? What are people wanting to talk about when they call for help from the movement? So there are different categories of requests for help. Some of them are informational about the kinds of with a kind of opportunity to learn and to hear different opinions, like the kinds of presentations that Rabbi Maurice has been doing. I would say every call that we get in this moment in the last 2 months, it begins with a conversation about the war, and often ends as that conversation, because it is simply an opportunity for people to check in, to touch base, to think through what the issues are that are arising in their communities and to be heard, right? So a lot of those calls, begin with some element of the pastoral. I would say that one of the main, there are several areas that I want to address. One, questions that have to do with how we talk to one another, how we in our communities engage. What does it mean to be in relationship with people who hold different opinions from those that you may hold, right? What are the challenges for building and maintaining productive conversation across those lines of differences? I would say that it is clear in those conversations that it is precisely in these moments that where we most need communal gatherings and where we most need opportunities to be able to engage with one another. I loved what Craig Levine said about what's happening in Montclair when he was describing the listening sessions earlier in this meeting about how their community's been gathering in the sanctuary without opportunities for crosstalk and debate, which is in fact cathartic and community building, and people feel heard and affirmed. How to create those kinds of sessions for those kinds of opportunities, and if a community wants, what would it mean to have a workshop or a facilitated conversation about how to practice those skills, about how to address differences, about how to express oneself, and how to indicate that as a listener that you have that you understand what you are hearing. That's one arena of topics of conversations that we're having with folks in our communities. Some of that, and in a subset of that conversation, has to do with generational divides that are appearing in our congregations. That is true among members, and it's also true with the demographic of many of our communities where folks have children who are adults, emerging adults, whose opinions may be different from theirs on Israel, and how very painful that is for folks saying, I can't talk to my daughter about this and it's breaking my heart. What can we do, right? That is both internal to family dynamics and also reflective of some of the congregational conversations that are happening. We are also having conversations about security. Security questions. Many of you have been engaging with security questions over the last few years. We've done a lot of consulting around security, particularly with a DEI lens in our communities. The security questions are opening up again at this moment, not because there has been, I know on Friday there were bomb threats to 15 congregations in the New York area that were false. They were false threats. They were designed to be disruptive. They were designed to distract law enforcement. The congregations were not under threat as it became clear, but they are very disruptive. And so many of the conversations we're having are about security, about what should we be doing? What should we be doing anything different? If we have one security guard, should we have another security guard? Those kinds of questions where I just want to be reassuring in all the ways that I can at this moment. Those of you who have been addressing security issues, you are doing what you need to be doing. It is not different. It is not different what it is that needs to be done. But some of the issues have to do with the optics of security at this moment. The congregation down the road has full-time security for their schools, and we don't. What should we be doing? How do we afford to do that? How do we pay for those kinds of concerns and considerations? So that is, those are conversations that we're having. And lastly, I would just say, I know Ed gave a shout out to paying attention to your rabbis at this moment. I want to also give a shout out to your executive directors and administrators. Those executive directors and administrators are frontline on these security questions. They are the ones who hear them from staff. They are the ones monitoring the cameras or ringing people into the door or feeling vulnerable in their roles as well. So if you have not yet checked in with your administrator use this as a reminder to please do that and make sure that they're okay in this moment. Could say lots more, but I think that's enough for now. I'm happy to take questions at the end.
Deborah, you're on.
Hey. So, having been preceded by two staff members of Reconstructing Judaism, I need to express my deep appreciation for the incredible work that they and other folks at Reconstructing Judaism are doing. This, as Tressa said, this is the centerpiece of every conversation. And it took us a couple of weeks to realize that and everyone at every level of the organization is working on, to some degree or another, on the situation that is unfolding in Israel and in Gaza and in the West Bank as things continue to deteriorate there, and in the remaking of the American Jewish community. And they're doing it with wisdom and in relationship with you and with each other, and as I think as well as we possibly can be doing it. And I think that's kind of a nutshell of what's going on. That this is I'm going to speak significantly about Reconstructing Judaism and the Reconstructionist movement in the wider world, and it is abundantly clear that there is like a remaking happening. And so I'm going to put my attention mostly to the United States. I think this is happening to a certain extent in Canada as well. I think that there are other things that are happening to our congregations in Europe and in South America that are reflective of all of this, but I'll focus in on the States. Since the beginning of my presidency, I have really prioritized as much as possible in my person and in the public representation I do, and in my orientation of the larger organization, to be in partnership and collaboration with other like-minded organizations, either like very, very well aligned with us or partly aligned with us. And that has been, to raise our profile, to expand our reach, to boost our impact, and to make certain that for all of you, that we are not replicating any things that other people are doing as well, if not better, and drawing on their expertise for the benefit of the larger Reconstructionist community. And Maurice named one of the most, it's a new-ish and a very important ally, especially at this time, is the Progressive Israel Network, which is, we're a founding member of. I think we're up to about 12 organizations, some of whom work solely on Israel, or on a two-state solution, and some of which work part of the time, and a handful are where it's just it will take over the way this is taking over. It's often a very like-minded and generative conversation. I have Reconstructing Judaism is also represented at the Jewish Federation of North America's Jewish Together Coalition, which are a set of networked organizations. So the other movements are there, and Hillel and Jewish Community Center Association, and more and more. And there it's a little bit more of a complex relationship. We are not a member of the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations. That's a whole strategic. The movement was at one point. We are not now. It's an open question about whether or not we should be. But it was JFNA and the Conference of Presidents together who put together the big rally, and Seth and I went. Maurice was there. Many folks were there. Maurice liaised with the Progressive Israel Network that put together a peace block, and that was one of the ways that I felt certain that I could go, is because I knew I would be part of this larger peace block, even though we never really found each other. And the low point of that rally, which was intended to be about centering the hostages and expressing support for Israel and standing against anti-Semitism. The low point was there was very little transparency about who was going to be included, and it was very, very distressing to realize that there were no rabbis. It was very distressing to realize that among the singers and the performers there were no women, so that no Orthodox people would be offended by Kol Isha, by the voice of women. And it was incredibly distressing when they brought on stage Reverend John Hagee, who is an explicit and an avowed anti-Semite, and whose support for Israel is instrumental in a way that would efface all of us, our very existence, let alone our aspirations and the values we stand for. So that's a complicated, and that is the set of decisions that they would make, and everything everything that flows from that is really, really complicated. I describe the Reconstructionist movement as being center left, and what I'm seeing within the Reconstructionist movement is that our center is moving further to the right, and that our left is moving further to the left, and so that makes the kinds of programs and relationship building exercises that Tressa and Maurice just spoke to incredibly important. And in the larger Jewish community, I think that's happening as well on steroids. And so for us to find our way through that in a way that holds our values and our commitments dear and clear, and that allows us to navigate through this thing that we're really in the middle of, that feels very, very important. I heard a powerful speaker talk about how there are forces that are trying to cleave those of us who have so much in common away from each other. And I really think that the mandate for us in the Reconstructionist movement is to bring to life the other definition of cleaving and find ways to cleave together. It happened that I was scheduled to be in a lot of congregations this fall, some of them for the fundraising purposes that Seth outlined earlier, and some of them in response to invitations to give keynote lectures or the like. And those visits went forward, and where topics were revised. I will share with you that one visit that Seth and I made that we didn't intend, that we kind of pulled together very last minute, was we were visiting our congregation, Kehillat Israel in East Lansing, met Michigan flying through Detroit, and we were there the weekend after Samantha Wall, that vibrant young 40-year-old congregational president who was not of our congregation but had close ties to our community. We were there the week after, and we stopped and basically offered support to that community. In keeping with some of the programming, I was recently at Hillel B'nai Torah in West Roxbury, Massachusetts, giving an annual lecture where we focused in on exactly the kind of how we talk to each other and building community across difference that Tressa was talking about. And Seth and I together, as I mentioned earlier, we were in Chicago this last week, visiting with members of the Jewish Reconstructionist Congregation, our community in Evanston, Illinois. They put together they have a wide range of opinions across their membership, and they pulled together an extraordinary task force that offered up a really powerful statement. And I'm really happy we're going to find lots of ways to amplify it, and one of them is by handing over the Zoom room to Marla Baker.
Marla, I think you're muted.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. The beautiful introduction, Deborah. So at JRC, first of all, some of you might know the history of our congregation, that when Rabbi Brent Rosen left about 7 or 8 years ago at this point, as an anti-Zionist, it really created a terrible rift in the congregation. And we had been unable to talk about Israel essentially since then as a congregation. So it was particularly important in this moment to find a way to change that dynamic across our differences. And with the expertise of our president and Rabbi Rachel Weiss, a working group actually was pulled together, of which I am a part, of 12 people that ranges from anti-Zionists and non-Zionists to Zionists, from myself at the older end to young 20s, and everything in between. And we were charged with several things that could reflect our congregation. There were moments when this seemed like a truly impossible task. A smaller group of people first met that included, if you will, the extreme views, to try to come up with the beginnings of a statement. It was particularly intense. We first was what would we on? It was you couldn't. There were lots of agree. We had find what were the proposals. Must stop the killing. All parties must stop the killing to create the conditions for less peace. The language of that whether there were a number of people who wanted to cover a ceasefire. We had to in less as ceasefire when we sent our full statement to the board for their approval. It was not approved. There were members of the board that had great difficulty with that language, as well as many people in the both the congregation who had an opportunity to read the draft of our full statement prior to the board meeting and an opportunity to speak at the board meeting if they wanted to. And many, many people showed up at that board meeting and did take advantage of that opportunity. So we ended up going back to the committee and changing that language to stop the killing instead. And that was something that passed the board with one abstention and otherwise a full agreement. Along the way, there were lots of issues. I don't know if I should go into a whole lot of detail on that or not. Our full statement, if you are interested, is on our website. Anybody can access it. In tandem with this, like some other congregations that have been mentioned today, also, after every Shabbat service on Friday nights and on Saturday mornings, there's an opportunity for what we are calling comfort circles with facilitators for people to sit in a small group and just bear whatever it is that they are experiencing around these issues at the moment. Much of that has been around Israel. Much of it has been around issues of anti-Semitism closer to home. And I think it's been very much appreciated by people, and people really do sit and listen to each other and bear witness for one another without necessarily agreeing on what people have to say. Our committee, now that we have this statement out, there's a communications committee that is getting that out to the wider community and to some politicians. And we have the group that I'm most involved with is on education. And we are looking both at the need for some programming on current events and on anti-Semitism in the short term, and also thinking about a longer range, deeper dive into, I used to call it the narratives, but two narratives around Israel that we are really looking at this point. We feel that it's important to also help all of us be better educated and learn how to integrate the various narratives that people are experiencing around this topic. I'm happy to give more detail and responses. Just to put that out as the forward that our congregation has done a great deal, I think, toward healing the long-term risks that we have had at JRC around this issue and helping people comfortable holding each other close and supporting each other despite differences in how we are experiencing this issue. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Marlon. I must say it's inspiring and offers me hope to hear how carefully and thoughtfully JRC has addressed the issues that all of us are facing, but perhaps in an even more charged environment, and seems to have found a productive path forward through it all, which is, I think, an example for all of us and a resource for all of us to look toward. We've had a lot of talking. I know Seth is the last one on the agenda for now. Seth, is there more that you would like to add at this juncture? Or should we proceed?
I'm looking at the clock, and I want to allow as much time as we can for our conversation. So if there's a dead spot later, I have a couple of things I might say, but I think it would be better if we allowed the members of the plenum to talk at this point.
Well, thank you. And you're unfrozen for the second, but we saw you there frozen for a moment, so it may be an opportune time not to speak too much. So we'd like to open up the floor to Q&A for any of the panel members who've spoken today, including Seth. And what I'll ask you all to do is, please, if you can, use the electronic hand, raise your electronic hand. It's much easier to manage questions that way. So with that, let me open up. If you all, anybody who wants to ask any questions, please queue up, raise your virtual hand, and we'll take you in order. Let me guess, this cannot be a shy bunch. I see Judy.
Okay, one of the things that certainly is of concern in our community is we have many students who are away at college. They're facing an awful lot of anti-Semitism. Are any of the congregations taking an active role in working with their students or advising parents on what they can be doing? And then along with that would be what is being done in other congregations with regard to families with young children, because they're also impacted.
So that's a great question. And let me do this. I'll open it up to the panel, but also if there are any plenum representatives on this call who have thoughts in response to Judy's question, in addition to raising your hand, shoot me a chat in the meeting chat, and I will call on you as well to talk about that issue. So with that, let me open it up to the panelists. Does anybody on the panel want to address the question? I think I saw Marla's hand coming up.
Yeah, our rabbi had a Zoom session with our college students to see where they were at. I also should mention, I neglected to mention that when we were writing this statement, the younger people on our committee were in contact with many of the alumni, young college students, and a good number of them, they wrote a collective letter, and then, I don't know, there were 8 or 10 individual letters in support of our statement and in support of the ceasefire language that was brought to the board. And it was quite extraordinary to have that kind of involvement with them. And they felt very heard, and I think it made a real difference for them. In addition to that, the rabbi met with them on Zoom, and we are now planning for a session with them and with the congregants who have affiliations with universities, whether as staff or as professors, over the Thanksgiving holiday, because we know that this is Thanksgiving, that's passed, over the December break, because there are many common issues for them to discuss together.
Well, thank you, Marlon. I'll only add as a quasi-panelist, because I do a great deal of work with another university that's been a darling, or lack thereof, of the media in recent months, that there is a wide divergence, not only in views, but in the sense of experience of students on campus today in response to these issues, from those who feel real danger and very threatened, to those who are remarkably indifferent or shrug off what's going on as if it's a nothing. And it suggests to me, as we look towards the holidays coming up and the break in most universities, from a community perspective, as the students come home, we can contemplate perhaps bringing students together from different campuses to share some of their views and their experiences, because I think they each can learn from each other, and it may help bind them to our communities and to give a sense of cohesion that they may be lacking, particularly as the experience is quite different within communities and among different communities. And the holidays are almost upon us. The breaks are almost upon us. With that, the next up on the queue is Stephen Lewis from KI Pacific.
Hi. So I think we all appreciate the resources that have been provided and the general discussion about the issues. I know at KI, there's been a lot more inquiry about getting historical perspective of the situation, and really, people are feeling like they want to be able to answer questions, but sometimes they don't feel like they have the backing to it, and we're all fighting the media when it comes to trying to create a narrative. But my question was really more about the movement and how the movement is using its influence in the political sphere. And I realize that statements are really hard to contrive, because you're trying to please a number of any number of committee members. But once something does come out, I was just curious, are we more attached with APAC, or, obviously, I don't think the march went as well, based on what you said, Rabbi Waxman, in terms of our exposure. So I just kind of wanted to know where the movement is politically and where we are affiliated. Domestically, I'm speaking.
I'll take that, and maybe I'll start, and Maurice, maybe Seth or Maurice, maybe you wanna. Thanks so much, Stephen. And I think different people experience the march differently. I do know that there was a contingent who flew in from KI. In Ohio, your cantor was there. I don't know how, I think different people experienced it differently. For me, that was just, I personally was looking for much more of a centering of the hostages, and much less of that anti-Semite, and much less of celebrities who know nothing speaking. Some of whom spoke powerfully, and some of whom just spoke without filters and in a chauvinistic way. So I wanted a little bit more discipline there.
And I think they also wanted to hit that 300,000 number. I think that number was really important.
And as someone who was at the Soviet Jewry March as a college student, I mean, it was very, very powerful, and I knew it would be complicated. The movement as a whole, so statements, Maurice touched briefly on this. You are exactly right. We have a breadth of opinion across the Reconstructionist movement. You've heard about it in some of the congregations. We saw really, it was quite unprecedented that we put a statement out on Shabbat and Simchat Torah, and the gravity of the situation on October 7th pushed us to do so, and we have really refrained from making statements since then. We are not a policy organization, and out of the recognition that this was going to be and continues to be a very fast moving situation, conflict, and that if we issued any additional statements, we would there would be pressure on us continuously to issue many more statements every couple of days or every week or so. It is really, really taxing for us to do it, and we were clear that what we wanted to do is focus much more on generating resources for members, for congregations writ large, and for members of our communities. I would say that I think that overwhelmingly the Reconstructionist movement is the largest concentration, the largest public Jewish organization that we have been aligned with for a while has been J Street. That's the largest plurality, I think I would say, of people who are. That's true of our rabbis. That's true of our congregations. When we go to J Street conferences, we hold a caucus that gets very good participation, and we are constantly running into other people in the hallway. I would say that prior to that, I would go to APAC prior to the pandemic. That was one of the last things I did in 2020. I would frequently go with the KI contingent because you guys send a fairly large group, and that overwhelmingly, it was a pretty small group of Reconstructionists and communities and rabbis who were there, but they were there, and many people, many of them, most of them, I would say, took a big step back when AIPAC put out it created its PAC and started to fund solely on Israel and not and especially after the events of January 6th, 2020, not taking that into consideration. So what we've tried to do is, and we're working with a communications consultant, is to not by statements, but through other mechanisms, storytelling and different expressions of public representation, to put forward a Reconstructionist perspective. So sometimes in my voice or in other movement leaders' voices, I don't want anyone to presume that I always and only speak for the Reconstructionist movement. And in this instance, I have, it is helpful because I can just say, I, as the president and CEO, this is where I stand. And it is far, I'm holding, to butcher Whitman, I try to hold all of our multitudes and try to synthesize it into the most values-driven and reflective perspective that I possibly can.
Thank you, Deborah. And I think the next up on the queue is Alyssa. Alyssa, I apologize if I don't pronounce your last name properly. Sanaman?
Everyone mute. Oh.
There you are.
So, where do I start? I made this observation that, well, let me start with, I live in Westfield. My synagogue is in Summit. I'm part of Beth Tekbis congregation. I made the observation that in Westfield, it was starkly quiet in terms of the interfaith clergy making any comment about anti-Semitism. I'm in the Martin Luther King Association. I'm not on the board, but I'm the co-chair of the History Committee. And I privately addressed the president of the organization as to why our organization had not come out against anti-Semitism. And it was the first time that I heard what I probably should have known all along, was that anti-Semitism was conflated with being pro-Gaza, pro-Palestinian, that if you came out against anti-Semitism, you were somehow undermining the Palestinian cause, and those were conflated. And there were various runarounds around that. But what I did notice is that in communities where the interfaith clergy did take a stand, for example, in Summit, where my Reconstructionist congregation is located, where there were strong interfaith relationships, statements against anti-Semitism were made. And in fact, I noted that in Craig Levine's presentation about B'nai Keshet. If I'm not mistaken, you can correct me, but I do believe he said that there was interfaith support. And I reckon that probably those connections are powerful. So I'm just going to throw out a hypothesis, and I don't know whether this is correct, it's just based on my own observation, that where clergy, Jewish clergy, develop or are part of a strong interfaith community, which needs to be built up over time, that can transcend that conflation of anti-Semitism with a pro-Palestinian support. I am not hearing it in Westfield. It's very disconcerting to me. I am part of a number of quote progressive anti-racism, the people in the community know I've not just spoken out, but worked in these efforts. So it's disappointing to me that the same community has not risen up. So I guess what I'm saying is that one initiative that might work toward undermining this is for clergy in different communities to be encouraged and supported in developing strong interfaith relationships as a way of undermining this quiet.
I've spoken a lot. I absolutely, I think that that's right, Elisa. That's exactly, we train Reconstructionist rabbinical students toward that end, and our partner organization, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association, that's a major focus of their activities on behalf of other rabbis, and provides a lot of support to do that. And different rabbis bring it to life in different ways. Communities, when they are in transition, when a longtime rabbi leaves, a lot of those relationships, you have to begin again. I think there are also local factors that make some things. It is no coincidence that, in addition to the kind of the real intentionality that the folks in Montclair bring, and I know a bit about that community to know that they do a lot, that also the senior rabbi has been there for well over 20 years, and so those also, the depth of those relationships also contribute to how well that works in times of crisis. And it is, what we also say is, it is wiser, it is so much better when we have these relationships. Just as we say to people, when you have a death in your family, it is so much easier to be supported by a community in a Shiva minyan when you're already part of that community. It is so much easier, it is so much better when these relationships exist beforehand.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, thank you both. And I see that Marla has her hand up.
Yeah, it's interesting that you raised that issue, and I just wanted to share what has been going on in our community, where there have been very strong interfaith relationships that the clergy have been involved with. When this first happened, the clergy was met with total silence from the interfaith community, and had to go to them. Not only our synagogue, but another synagogue in Evanston that has also had very strong relationships with the interfaith community. And they weren't hearing from anyone, and had to go to them and say, where are you? And after they reached out, we had at our next Shabbat service, which was just the following week after October 7th, about 100 people, including many, many, many clergy and congregants that they brought with them to show support. Interestingly, after that, it was silent again. And when the clergy, our clergy, reached out to them, they said, we don't know what to say. And they actually convened a meeting to help them figure out, how do you talk about this issue in an interfaith context? So sometimes, even when you have those strong relationships, you have to do more work to help people know what they can do. So.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the thoughts, Marla. And somehow it's 2:33 and the queue looks empty of further questions. So this group is very, very timely. So let me just, one last call. If there are any other questions or comments before we head to wrap up the meeting close to on time. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Maurice for a closing kavanah, and then I'll have a last announcement or two to wrap the meeting.
Well, thank you all for participating today, and also for your rolling with the punches around the mix up in the very beginning around the start time. I want to leave us just with the acknowledgement that our hearts are big enough to hold more than one set of concerns at a time. And our hearts are big enough to also recognize that we can share core values with other members of the Jewish community and arrive at different conclusions about what particular statement to sign on to, or what particular argument to stand behind in a given moment. And what I'd like to just offer as a parting kavanah, as a parting intention, is calling on the source of wisdom to enlarge our hearts to be able to hold wisdom and patience and compassion, to pause when we're confronted with an argument that gives us doubt or discomfort, and not just react to it or run away from it, but let it have a moment of consideration and reflection in our conscience. And then to ask for a higher power, however you might name it, to help us try to navigate as best we can, and to not do it alone, to turn to one another in our vulnerability and in our hope, and to ask each other for help. And that's how I would close our meeting today.
Thank you, Maurice, and those are wonderful thoughts to move on with. In terms of our next meeting, the date is not yet set, but you should all anticipate it will most likely be on a Sunday in late April or relatively early May, but not the first Sunday in May. And we'll give you the exact date when we know. The time again will be as usual, 1 o'clock Eastern, with special gratitude to Ivo and those in Europe for whom that's a very late hour, and to those on the West Coast for whom it's a comparatively early hour, and to those in between who are giving up the heart of their Sunday for our meetings. That's part of being Reconstructionist, is finding a time that kind of sort of works for everybody. But whatever date we wind up meeting again, I just hope and pray the next time we meet as a plenum, it is in a time of peace, and we can talk about all good things. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And I have a Chag Sameach, have a wonderful next few months, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.